He's muted. We can get started. As we were saying before, some of you came in. We've had the cold snap. We have a lot of snow on the ground right now, and we've gone literally from summer to winter in a couple of days. So anyway, so I'm by the fireplace rather than I usually do the zooming from our casita, but it's ice cold in there right now. Anyway, we had some very sad news this weekend, another great loss to the poetry world, Diane di Prima, who was probably the first woman to really break through in the Beat generation, and has been a tremendous force for poetry and activism for decades. And so she just passed away this weekend. So I wanted to start with a poem of hers, and I thought that that since we just got our first snow here, I would read her poem, First Snow Kerhonkson, which is from the collection, the City Lights collection, Pieces of a Song, Selected Poems. And it's for Allen Ginsberg. This then is the gift the world has given me, you have given me. Softly the snow, cupped in hollows, lying on the surface of the pond, matching my long white candles which stand at the window, which will burn at dusk while the snow fills up our valley. This hollow, no friend will wander down, no one arriving brown from Mexico, from the sun fields of California, bearing pot. They are scattered now, dead or silent or blasted to madness by the howling brightness of our once common vision. And this gift of yours, white silence filling the contours of my life. Diane di Prima. So, I'm going to introduce the first of our readers, Denise Weaver Ross. And Denise is a great friend in Albuquerque, and she is the designer, the book designer for Poetry Playhouse Publications. She is very well known as a visual artist for her paintings and for her murals in many locations in Albuquerque. And she was, in fact, a couple of years ago, about 2 years ago, the Arts Council here declared her a treasure of the city. So a wonderful visual artist, but she's just as good as a poet. And she has been publishing quite a few books through, mostly through our press. She, in previous books, had paintings, color reproductions of paintings, along with poems. So it was a great mix. And then this year, she put together her House of Cards as a full-length book of paintings and poems, so which is really terrific. And then she came out with her first book that is exclusively poetry, Letters to the Deceased and Other Missives, and again, another beautiful cover. And these are autobiographical poems about members of her family, past and present. And again, just an amazing book. And she's working on a new book of art and poetry that'll be based on the I Ching. So let's welcome Denise Weaver Ross.
Hello, everybody. I picked out, the book is sort of separate, divided by people in my life, or important people. So the first section has the title poem, Letters to the Deceased, which was my husband, who died nearly 20 years ago. He was 39. He died of complications from sickle cell disease. So this poem was probably the first one I started writing about him, and I kept rewriting it for the past 20 years or whatever. I think actually I wrote it about 10 years ago. So it's called A Letter to the Deceased. Midway between your death and my father's, 2 planes took down the towers where once we hovered over Manhattan that weekend in New York. Afterwards, we went to Coney Island, like the young lovers we were, and rode the cyclone not once, but twice, spun on the Wonder Wheel, and drove disco bumper cars to the tune of Crash Goes Love. Crash Goes Love. We stayed the night in Greenwich Village with an art school friend, and then met a former housemate for dinner who was squatting in a condemned building rent-free. That evening, we all went to Danceteria with 7 floors of music, along with our future best man, who later died in Coney Island Hospital. When the towers came down, so did that last barrier I had erected to hold back my grief. I woke up at 4 a.m. every morning, drove to the office for a couple of hours of work before returning home and getting the boys off to school, listening to the radio on the way there and back. Then I would allow myself to cry to the accompaniment of news of death, destruction, and war, knowing that you had gone at the right moment, before injustice, hatred, and the racial divide engulfed us once again. That was when I first encountered you in a dream, in a room of body bags stacked up like 3,000 lost garment bags. I climbed to the top of the heap, unzipping the one I knew was yours, and you popped right up like a jack-in-the-box and began talking to me as you had every evening when I would wake you up for dinner. As always, we discussed current events, the latest scientific discoveries, movies, and the antics of our sons at school. When we finished talking, you laid back down, and I zipped you back into the case, feeling strangely comforted. I should also say he was an immigrant from Jamaica, so it's important to know. Thank you. The next one is a poem that, a memory that was triggered right after the pandemic began. So it's called Degrees of Separation. 2 degrees of separation is how close the virus has now come to our family. The news came today in the form of a video chat held in the palm of my hand with family and friends from Georgia, Massachusetts, and New York, each in our tiny box on a small screen. Carl in Brooklyn broke the news. His brother is on a ventilator in Queens. Remember when we followed Carl racing from Massachusetts through Connecticut into New York while he was playing tricks to see if I could keep up with him in our old Buick with a sticky clutch? I was so relieved when we finally drove over the White Stone Bridge into Queens, where we stayed with his brother and his girlfriend. It was 1984. Your brother Wayne was married the next day in Brooklyn, followed by a reception in Flatbush, a New York slice of the Caribbean. And you stopped and picked up a stick of sugar cane from the market. I was the whitest thing on the street that day. While we waited for your aunt from Jamaica to catch up with us, a couple of brothers stopped their cars in the street to stare at me. When Auntie Barbara arrived, she stared back at them, sucked her teeth, saying, "Cha, you think them never seen a white gal before?" We laughed and went inside to stuff ourselves with curry goat, rice and peas, plantain, and a slice of the largest wedding cake I had ever seen, made from Jamaican fruit cake, the fruit having been soaked in rum and port for 6 months in advance. We danced all night and hung out in the corner with Michael, who a couple of years later became the best man at our wedding, and who we saw for the last time dying in a Coney Island hospital from a rare form of brain cancer, a result of AIDS. So on Palm Sunday, I stop and pray for the health of Carl's brother and for us all. And the next poem was written this summer, shortly after George Floyd's death. So that sort of brought up all the encounters my husband and his family had in Boston after I met him. So it's called Bearing Witness. Remember when you and your brothers came back from getting groceries in the middle of winter, still laughing at the sight of a little old white lady frantically pulling her shopping cart over snowbanks to cross the street because she saw the 4 of you walking down the street, shivering in your thin excuses for winter coats. Remember when you came home shaking with rage after being accosted in the middle of the street by the electronics store manager who gave you the choice of either searching your bag or calling the police just because you had left the premises without a purchase? Remember when your boss told you you had some balls for coming to your bank job with a Carl Lewis flat top haircut after you won the Olympic gold medals for the 100-meter, 200-meter, 100-meter relay and the long jump? Remember how at the same bank, the security guard asked for your ID every single morning and waved me through every evening when I came to meet you so we could ride the green line together? Remember the job interview where they told you that they had a homogeneous environment and wanted to keep it that way, as if you were from another species? Remember when your brother got arrested for assault because he asked the police why he was stopping him and his friends and the discussion got heated? Remember when the police beat up your sister and charged all 5 feet and 90 pounds of her with assault when she screamed at them to stop beating up her boyfriend when he asked them why they were harassing her? Remember when you turned too sharply into our driveway, spinning your tires in the gravel, and a policeman came running across the street, throwing you against the car, charging you with failure to use care while turning, or ordinance for utility vehicles? Remember later in court when the charge was dismissed, he told the judge he should have charged you with assault since some of the gravel dust had spun up onto his police car? Remember our last weekend in Boston? There was a blizzard and you had iritis, an emergency eye condition that required immediate treatment or you would go blind. Remember, I couldn't see the signs in the whiteout and went the wrong way on a one-way and got pulled over with your eye glowing bright red, and you had to call his supervisor before we were allowed to proceed. Remember all the times in the hospital when I had to call your Harvard specialist, asking her to contact the nursing station so you could get the pain medication you needed to get through another sickle cell crisis? Remember how you died 15 minutes after arriving at a new hospital because our health insurance had changed and you didn't want to enter one more medical institution, and all the pain and humiliation of a Black man needing narcotics? So that's my witness for George Floyd. It was interesting because my uncle was like, geez, Denise, you've told me all the stories, but somehow hearing them all together, it was different. So I'm moving on into the section about my parents. So this one's called Graduation Day. I learned to tie my shoes the day my father graduated with his master's degree in psychiatric social work. Sitting in the playground of our Milwaukee apartment building, I was totally focused on my laces when suddenly the late spring afternoon became quiet and dark. Looking up from my shoes, noticing the blue and orange sky, the electric air, I started running as the weather horns sounded the alarm. And my father appeared tall and smiling in his dark gown and carried me inside as golf ball sized hail bounced around us. Years later, my mother and I remembered his graduation day when returning to our Albuquerque home in early June, just after spreading his ashes in a memorial rose garden. Golf ball sized hail arrived to mark his departure. And this is about my mother, called Bionic Woman. She just had her birthday. So in this poem, she was 88, but she's now 89. So at 88, my mother is a bionic woman. First, it was a cornea transplant at 65, and both knees replaced when she was 68, an ankle fused at 70, and the other cornea removed, retooled, and reinserted a couple years later. But her inner strength is all her own. Once 5'6" she has shrunk a couple of inches as her arthritic bones lose mass. But she took care of my 6'4" father through dialysis up until he fell and hit his head. She called me then. We were in Boston visiting my son's other grandmother, and she left me a message to call home because my father thought she had done something to the grandchildren and had buried them in the backyard. Later, after he passed away, never recovering from surgery to relieve the pressure on his brain, she said he had been so sweet, though, promising to stand by her when the police came. Okay. And then the next section is for my sons. So I've picked a couple of poems from there. The first one's called Overdraft, a mother's advice to her sons. Overall, I recommend living life in overdraft. Count blessings twice, and like a bad bookkeeper, neglect to record curses. If you are fortunate enough to love and be loved, do not count the ones your lover loves as debiting your account. Always cook the books in your favor. Focus on what you do well. What you cannot do well and cannot change should remain off the record. When an unexpected windfall comes your way, share it. Don't save it. In a flood, your friends and family will save you from drowning quicker than your bank account. Wake up every morning valuing the small, simple joys as 10 times worth purchased pleasures. Do all these things, you may never be rich, but you will always have what you need each day. So that's my advice. And this is my advice and now my fears. So this one's called Night Sweats. When my sons go out at night, one brown, one pale, wearing their wild Caribbean hair, driving down the block to get gas or fast food, I always think about car accidents, police, strangers carrying guns, the sons who never return. And I was going to, I'm sort of switching the one I had planned. This is in the section called Sister. My sister died about 3 years ago in December. But we grew up in Minnesota and Wisconsin. And since this is a snowy day, I'm gonna read this one. It's called Snow Camp. We go up to north of Rhinelander, Wisconsin between Christmas and New Year's every year. And this was our favorite camp. It was freezing, but it was a lot of fun. Okay, Boxing Day, bundled up in our father's long underwear, parkas, double socked, cotton and wool, furry boots, turtleneck sweaters, and carrying sleeping bags rated for 30 below. We climbed into a yellow school bus to travel the 5 hours north of Milwaukee. At our favorite camp, we rode horses through brilliant snow, the warm animal smell seeping into our clothes until the cold was deemed too much for the beasts. And we switched to cross-country skis, working our feet up and down until we could finally feel our toes. Finally, on huge black tractor inner tubes with 10 other teens, we would careen down icy slopes through pine trees and out onto the lake where we would skate on bumpy lake ice. Except it was too cold to change into the thin white leather of our figure skates. During a twilight walk to the woods, we silently caught a glimpse of a rare snowy owl turning its ghostly head. The Arctic blast had forced itself from Canada, too cold for even the northernmost owl. So cold, the propane heaters in the cabins quit. So cold, we slept with all our clothes packed around us in our sleeping bags. So cold, the day after the farewell bonfire, the bus wouldn't start. Yet we happily waited another day for the temperatures to rise to 0 so the engine could ignite and carry us home for the new year. So it's been a long time since I appreciated that kind of cold weather. I'm spoiled now. Yeah, someone says too cold for the beasts, but not for the children. That's correct. They weren't with the horses, but we were hardy northern Midwestern stock. So this one is from the greats and grands section of my book. I have a very large extended family. My father was 7 of 10 children, and my mother was the oldest of 5. And so there's lots of uncles and aunts and nieces and everybody. So this is called Solstice. Winter solstice, shortest day and longest night, the world tilts away from the sun before bringing us back slowly into the light of a new year. It reminds me of summer solstice, the swinging pendulum of Aunt Betty Jane's grandfather clock, chiming every hour as you try to sleep through long hot nights during our annual Dayton, Ohio visits. The police band radio would squawk all night. So Uncle Paul, a retired postman and volunteer firefighter, could be forewarned in case of emergency. In the morning, the parakeets would start the dawn chorus, announcing the first glimmer of light, and we would wearily rise from a short and noisy night. So that was our visit to my dad's family every year. Okay, and then the next section is called Friends and Lovers. So I have two poems about an old friend of mine. And the first one's called Valentine's Day Card. My favorite Valentine's card ever, original, hand-drawn, and completely tongue-in-cheek, from a closeted college boyfriend, lies buried somewhere in boxes of things I cannot bear to part with, hidden deep in the back of my shed. I go through the boxes every time I move, and each time there's one less box, but it seems I can never discard a really good laugh. Okay. And then inspired by the same guy called Handsome. I dreamt of you last night. We got married, the three of us. But first I swam across the Oconomowoc River right after spring thaw and met you on the opposite bank. Before it morphed into a fabulous wedding, filmed in black and white, in which we, you, me, and him, danced nearly delirious with joy. Upon waking, I surmise that the dream arose because another friend recently cut his hair down to the scalp, letting the gray show, just like in your recent photos, accentuating the similarity between your wide, sensuous mouths. You were always as handsome as a heartbreak. And then the last couple of poems are those from the section I call Me. So the first, I chose two of them. First one is sort of remembering my childhood in Wisconsin. My grandparents ran a camp in the Kettle Moraine area of southern Wisconsin, which is untouched since the glacier. So 40 acres of wilderness. Yeah, beautiful. And they were there from the time I was 8 to the time I was past the time I was 18. So it was really a real gift to the family. And I enjoyed walking in the woods out there all those years. And so this is also inspired by William Carlos Williams, as you will see here. 13 thoughts when remembering red-winged blackbirds. 1, at the thought of red-winged blackbirds, my mind, excuse me. My mind chases down a dirt road in the steaming heat of summer. 2, I am 13 and my dog Cinnamon follows and we kick up puffs of dust. 3, along the edge, cattails sway in a slight breeze with monarch butterflies fluttering around them. 4, I turn off onto the marsh path in spite of the mosquitoes. 5, I stink of DEET and wear long pants and a windbreaker with a hood pulled up. The woods are full of deer flies. 6, in the spring, the path is lined with violets, shining in the black earth, glowing among dark trees. 7, jack-in-the-pulpits and wild asparagus also grow in abundance. 8, reaching the marsh, dragonflies hover over water lilies. Their bright blue bodies flash in the green gloaming. 9, I have named all the gnarled trees along the edge. 48 years later, I remember only the keyhole. 10, it is a tree that has split and fallen into the murk, with a perpendicular piece of bark rising vertically from the trunk. 11, balancing along several feet of wood, I bend down and peer through the torn heart-shaped hole in the center. 12. It frames a secret world so quiet, I can hear only my thoughts and the occasional plop of a frog. 13. I glimpse my future, and like the bards of euphony, I cry out sharply. So that's my sort of my love poem to that part of my childhood. And finally, I first came to New Mexico on a church mission trip to Grants when they're still mining uranium. So I'm very old. But I didn't fall in love with the church, but I fell in love with New Mexico at that time and always wanted to move back. So we moved here 20 years later. I got to move here and have no desire to leave again. So this is called The Bluest Sky. New Mexico first entranced me when I was 18 while hiking up the turquoise mountain known as Mount Taylor. Reaching the crest, I climbed the steep steps to the fire watchtower as the sun was setting, and the tower windows were soon covered by thousands of moths attracted to the light. 48 years later, I leave Albuquerque behind for a weekend and drive into the Red Canyon of Jemez Springs, remembering a day trip soon after we finally relocated to New Mexico. After driving up past Santa Fe to Los Alamos, we drove back down the long way towards Albuquerque, slowly winding around the Jemez Mountains, until turning around the bend, we stopped, startled by the beauty of the water-filled caldera, reflecting the bluest sky. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. I unmuted you, Jen.
I just remuted myself by mistake. Anyway, delightful. Thank you so much,
It
Denise.
was delightful.
Feel free to unmute yourself and clap for
Yeah,
Denise if you like.
Give a quick, quick
I love her.
Denise,
I say bravo. Yes.
Love her book.
Yeah, Joe finally got in. I think what
Good.
happened is
Glad you got in, Joe.
Oh, thank you. The passcode was not was only in my email, so we found that out.
Good, glad you're in.
And we have a couple other Albuquerque friends, Sylvia Ramos Cruz and Jesse Ehrenberg, who have joined us.
hello, hello.
Yay.
Hey guys. Oh, look at you. You're there.
Okay.
All right. Jules, did you want to say a word about the donation jar?
Yeah, we do. When we originally had this at Kaktus Brewing in Bernalillo, we would pass the hat for the poets. So now what we do is we have the donate button. So you can go to poetryplayhouse.com and click on the main home screen. There's a donate button for PayPal or however you want to do that. And the money, we split it, it goes to the poets. So,
And you'll put
we
the
always
link
like to
in the
support
chat.
poets. And I'll put it on the chat, just poetryplayhouse.com. And it's like, we also have more of the Playhouse Mass. So,
Oh, that's nice.
hey, if you want to make a statement when you're out and about, we have them on the website under the art section, or just message me or email me and I'll get you, send you the link.
Yeah.
How much are they going for?
They're $10, which is kind of what, just a little bit over cost, and that includes mailing to wherever you're at. So
No, it's just,
we have a little, you can.
I don't need it anymore, but I was just wondering.
Unless you're in New Guinea or.
Yeah, within
Oh,
the US.
John, that's just terrible.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
Okay, so we're moving on then to thank you again, Denise Weaver Ross. We're moving on to our next poet. As we were saying before we got started, that Jules and I met George I'm thinking about 8 years ago, when he came to read in Rochester for the Just Poets group and gave a workshop at Kitty Joss Bay's house. Kitty is here with us today. And we've stayed in touch. And I think he's one of the finest poets writing today, and is truly amazing. He also came to Albuquerque in January 2019, right before we moved from Albuquerque to Placitas. He did a reading at our house with Santa Fe poet Barbara Rockman. Some of you may have been there. So George is a writer in residence at the Walt Whitman birthplace in Huntington, Long Island. He is the author of 37 chapbooks of poetry, editor, co-editor of
Oops.
mute, sorry. He is the co-editor or editor of Poetry Bay, Great Weather for Media, Long Island Quarterly, and Walt's Corner. Do check out Poetry Bay, especially if you haven't already. POETRYBAY. Somebody needs to mute. And George has been to a number of national and international festivals. He reads in England a lot, in Macedonia and other countries. And I'm not going to go. He also, our good friend Dorothy Alexander, he helped Dorothy get the Woody Guthrie Poetry Festival going in Okemah, Oklahoma. I'm not going to go through the long list of things, except that he has visited New Mexico a couple of times, read at the Church of Beethoven, the Mabel Dodge Lewin House, the great Teatro Paraguas in Santa Fe, and of course, Jules Poetry Playhouse. So welcome, George.
All right. Thank you very much. Thanks, John. Thank you, Jules. Great to hear you, Denise. Fabulous poetry, visiting parts of the world. Your memories of Flatbush, really struck home with me. So I am here in New York. I guess most of you are in the Albuquerque area. Kitty is in Rochester. We got people from Minnesota, from California and Maryland and all sorts of places. So yeah, so that's what I love about Zoom, and I'm glad to share a few minutes of poetry with you today from my home here in New York. And I'll start because Denise did a pandemic poem. I'm going to read you just one pandemic poem I wrote. This was for a surgeon by the name of Lorna Breen, Lorna Breen. She's director of one of the emergency rooms in New York City at the height of the COVID epidemic here in New York, when things were really quite tense. And not from New York, she's from Charlottesville, Virginia, but she had come up here, had been working up here. And even though she caught COVID during the height of the thing and went home to recuperate, she was desperate to come back and continue to work and work with her co-emergency workers and nurses and doctors that she had as colleagues. And it was too much for her, the whole tension and pressure of it. And this is a story that I picked up, one of those small things that maybe was like 3 column inches in the New York Times, her obituary and her sacrifice and what she represents. If only I could play Foray's Elegy like Lorna Breen. The title comes from the fact that she was, in addition to being a surgeon, she loved to play cello and go snowboarding and a lot of different things. She's a cellist. If only I could play Foray's Elegy like Lorna Breen. This poem for Lorna Breen and the strength of her compassion and the unspoken depths of her wounds. Dr. Lorna Breen, age 49, chief of emergency medicine at New York Presbyterian, who loved playing cello and snowboarding and posted pictures of it on Facebook, who was at the center of it all. The impossible situation come horribly true in the streets and hospitals of New York City. The great pandemic, 2,000 patients piled up in every bed, behind every hospital door in New York, ambulances idling, 3 bodies deep in the parking lots, DOA, nobody else to deal with it but those who took an oath to do so. The rest of us in town ordered to avoid all contact with death. This poem is for Lorna Breen. At the limits of her endurance when the virus took her. Sick with it first, and then she recovered enough to go back to work. And she, quote, tried to do her job, and it killed her, said her dad. Also a doctor back in Charlottesville, Virginia. This poem for Lorna Breen and for every doctor and every nurse and emergency worker in New York City, all day and all night in that April at the center of the storm. How to stand at a window, the rest of us, at 7 p.m. and offer applause and then return to the silence of our rooms. When day after goddamn day, they get up out of their grim beds and throw themselves back into the thick of it. And yes, however, even to say the trite cliche, avoid something like the plague, how stupid, how can I ever use that phrase again? But most of all, this poem is for Lorna Breen, 49, who loved to play cello and save other people's lives. Lorna Breen, I say the name, who took her own life after saving many others, who died and did herself and her family proud anyhow, who stood side by side with her colleagues, no place to hide from the terrible witness, offering all the strength in her all too human body in aid and comfort to the dead and the dying, until there was just no more to give. For Lorna Breen, April 28th. This poem is titled, there's going to be a lot of politics in this, I'm sorry, but 2020, the year that Brooklyn had to tell the president where to go. Look, we get it. You're not from around here. You can't understand what it means to be from Brooklyn and watch a con man and a bully take someone down. What it means to keep your mouth shut when you know better, to let someone you care about get kneecapped. Lie to yourself. Look the other way. Pretend it's not happening. Try not to be the next one that name is called up during ass kissing and ass kicking time. Cheer it on when it isn't you. No, you're not from around here. You must be from some other part of America where shit like this doesn't happen, where people don't get pushed around like that. Or if they do, they don't even realize it. They're so busy being American and winning at football and driving trucks. Like the entire country is getting took right now. Do you understand that? The entire country is getting took right now. Some people think it's a joke. And some wise guy is owning them is owing some of their fellow citizens and taking their fellow citizens for a ride. This is not no joke. And a nation has got to wake itself up and take the con man out, because he's not gonna get rid of himself. A wise guy is gonna keep on being a wise guy and turn other people into his nasty little agents of pain until somebody stops him, till somebody comes along or some combination of people come along and stop him before he goes too far. Take, for example, the current incumbent conman in chief in Washington, D.C. That is some real live bullshit there. Some real live bullshit. And it's gone too far. And everyone's letting it happen and praising him on Sunday, except a very few people. And in particular, a couple of mensches from Brooklyn. Bernie Sanders, Dr. Fauci, RBG, may she rest in peace, who of course understand it in their guts, because they were certainly taught that in Brooklyn over a kitchen table every day of their lives as kids by a woman who knew what happened in the old country or in the Jim Crow South, when people kept their mouths shut and let creeps have their way. Look what it got them. And I don't want to hear anything about can't take a knee. And I don't want to hear anything about show respect, or you can't protest this, or you can't protest that, or let a little far fly when the bullies got you by the balls. That is just plain wrong. I mean, nobody's that stupid. Listen, when the country's being trampled by a posse of gun-toting Cossacks and brown shirts and neo-Nazi bastards, silence is not an option. It didn't work then, and it won't work now. So how about we all just stick together, us liberals, for half a minute and not form circular firing squads and beat hell out of the fascists again, like Woody Guthrie told us to do. Because every now and then, that's what ordinary people have to do. If you want to have a little peace and quiet, you have to speak truth to power for a little while. You have to stand up and fight for a little while. And if we do that, then we can just go on our own merry way again and completely forget that we had to cooperate with each other. And remember when we were told a president of the United States exactly when he had to tell a president of the United States exactly where to go. And won't it be nice when we can go back to being neurotic or crazy like Woody Allen, or individual and wrongheaded and make dumb mistakes and chase our beautiful, talented kids on bicycles and interpret dreams in some totally odd and exotic Brooklyn way? Won't it be nice? And save lives and make money and study religious texts until we need glasses and be dentists and accountants and psychiatrists and folk singers and jump off the Brooklyn Bridge and go to Coney Island and attend rock concerts and make movies and compose symphonic dances about rodeos and Appalachian Springs? Won't it be nice to do whatever ridiculous things mensches from Brooklyn have been doing forever? Bums and heroes, almost, not that, that's a good place to stop there, isn't it? Yeah, I've been doing forever. Well, let's see if it should stop there. Bums and heroes and Supreme Court justices and geniuses, immunologists too, perfect, imperfect, normal people who just by accident happen to, oops, have come from Brooklyn, New York, and can't help shooting their mouths off when they see something's wrong, while everybody else is just biting their tongues and keeping their mouths shut. Some of us had to do that in the year of our Lord, 2020. And it's time the rest of us open up our damn mouths too and save ourselves from ourselves. Thank you very much, America. Sincerely, Bernie Sanders. Sincerely, Bernie Sanders, who currently has to. Sincerely, Anthony Fauci, who currently has to. Sincerely, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, may she rest in peace, who until her last dying breath had to. That's the end. Thanks. Thank you. And this one is for Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I wrote it. There she died. She loved opera. Turandot was one of her favorite operas. It's one of the only things that took her mind off of legal briefs, she said. This is September 19th, 2020. Well, Ruth Bader Ginsburg loved opera and opera loved her back. That was the headline in the New York Times on September 19th. 2020, the day after she died. But when RBG, all 5'1" of her, stood before the all-male, all-white, save Thurgood Marshall, Supreme Court of the United States to defend the right of an Air Force lieutenant and female to be breadwinner of her family and earn all the benefits accruing to that position as any would have her colleagues earn. She didn't have opera on her mind. Summoning the combined power of Carmen, Leonore, Manon Lescaut, and Turandot, i.e. all the feisty opera heroines in the book, to her mortal frame, she showed the entire world of American jurists exactly what a woman who will not be tamed is made of. January 17th, 1973. The 9 leading jurists of the land were dumbstruck. Not one justice could say a single word, not even William Rehnquist, Nixon's big mouth buddy. Her head was in the law, said Brenda Feigen, RBG's law partner in the Frontero case, with a helpless little laugh, and sometimes she loved the opera. When asked to render their decision on the question, did a federal law requiring different qualification criteria for male and female military spousal dependents unconstitutionally discriminate against women, thereby violating the Fifth Amendment's due process clause, the Supreme Court of the United States in 1973 answered with one word, yes. What toll it took on the 5'1" frame of Ruth Bader Ginsburg that day, no one of us may know. However, Feigen later admitted this. After arguing the case, RBG, Brooklyn's fiercest, most notorious, and emotionally drained woman warrior that day, had to be physically carried to Washington Airport for the flight back home. It was the opening salvo in a war of women's rights worthy of opera. Consider the opera, Turandot. Turandot, who fought to restore the power of her ancestors of the millennia past. Principessa Luo Ding, who had reigned over her domain in silence and joy, resisting the harsh domination of men until conquered by the Tartars. You princes arriving in such glory, she sang, proudly seeking further conquest. This declared Ruth Bader Ginsburg on January 17th, 1973. Not in this palace. Not in this palace. I take revenge on you for all she suffered. And on that note, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, all 5'1" of her, waged a war to restore the power of women in America for 47 more years. Yeah, 47 more years. Leaving a grateful nation dumbstruck with her prowess, speechless with praise. Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Thank you. She was cool. You know, there's some, I think it's a scam going around Facebook right now. They write 8 poems in 8 days, Pete me no poetry or something like that. I think it's fake. I don't know if anybody's done it, but I did it. And then I checked. It was supposed to be some guy in Russia who's going to translate all these poems into Russian and do an anthology. There's about 100,000 of these things, 100,000 poems at this point. But I dutifully wrote my 8 poems, you know, and that was one of them from that period over a course of 8 days. And because I would never do this to anybody else, I didn't nominate anybody else, you know, but that's just kind of like chainmail thing that this guy started. Anyway, this was the first one I did that for that 8-day series, 9/19. Why are the refugee children smiling? And you're supposed to take a picture, and I didn't realize it was supposed to be, it could be any picture you wanted. I thought it was supposed to be from the news. So I did that one for Ruth Bader Ginsburg with a picture of her, you know, standing, she's talking back to somebody. She's pointing at somebody. This one was that there's a picture of children in a refugee camp. They're like laughing. They look like they're happy. They're not like, you know, you can help this child or you can turn the page. They are empowered in their friendship and in their youth and in their future. And I looked at that and I said, this picture tells me something that nobody understands. These children own the future. Whoever's doing whatever they're doing to those children, those people are dying soon. The future belongs to those children, not to us, for good or for bad. God bless them for that. Why are the refugee children smiling? The children you cage behind bars and walls and razor wire are not afraid of you. In fact, they are smiling. In every refugee camp, in every detention center, you try to hold them in. You try to intimidate them with. Even as you count them captive, even as you punish them for your own sins, even as you parade them before cameras and lash them with the tongues of your ministers of hate, they see through your weakness. They see through your fear. They see through your crudeness and your cruelty and the futility of your old world scapegoat ideologies. In fact, they see through your walls. What do they see? They see a future without you in it. And that's why the refugee children are smiling. Thank you. I haven't been paying attention. Time. I'll do 3 more poems, I think. Yeah. Here's a little elegy for David Olney. We have lost a lot of people. Diane DePrima, and I won't read the Diane DePrima one, but Ruth Weiss very recently died, and Michael McClure, of course. So 3 really remaining giants of the beat world that we've lost. But also, here's a guy that you may not have known so well, unless you're a fan of kind of Texas folk music, you know, which you may be, folky blues type music. A guy by the name of David Olney, O-L-N-E-Y. He died the most beautiful death that any performer could ever possibly die. He died on stage with a guitar in his hand. In concert, he stopped playing. He looked at the people in the crowd. He said, I'm sorry. And he closed his eyes. Right. Carla knows this. Just an unbelievable moment. We should all die this way. Beautiful. So, but it's an elegy, a little elegy for David Olney. He wrote a song, and one of the phrases is probably the most famous song he wrote, "The women cross the river, carry water from the well at break of day." I'm not going to pretend to try to sing it for you, but you know, there's one of these many Texas folky country songs, a little bit of blues tinge to it, which harkens to the fact that that across the border is where something magical is. It's where you can go and actually, you know, live a more spiritually, you know, dimensional world, beautiful world than where you are now. And you should see that recurring in these songs. Because, you know, if you cross the border, that's where real romance and real, you know, rich enriched life is. The women cross the border, carry water from the well at break of day. Well, here's a glass of whiskey and an elegy for Dave Olney, whose songs made other people famous. Not him. to a man who didn't make the headliner list on January 18th, 2020, at a folk festival in Florida, like Brian Wilson did, like Tanya Tucker did, like John Prine did before he died. Who took the stage anyway? Beautiful. 71 and obscure. Beautiful. 71 and obscure. How true that rings to me. Who played like he always played. Obdurate, fluid, sweet, and well. Not quite in the limelight, not quite out of the limelight. How he started his set, stopped, put his guitar carefully down, apologized to the crowd, and died. Still sitting on his stool. How gently David Olney closed his eyes. How humbly the beautiful bearded chin of David Olney fell to his chest. Yep, here's a glass of whiskey, sufficient to his rising and his fall, sufficient to his final bow to the ground, sufficient to his song and our imperfect knowledge of his songs, sufficient to his gaze, fixed forever on some holy place, beyond the grave, beyond the audience, beyond fame, beyond the boundaries of reputation and applause, to a place across the river where our gazes also turn. For David Olney. Thanks. And I'll read one more poem. Peace is honey. This is also a series of 8. I saw a picture was a news picture of a Palestinian boy helping his father with honeycombs. They were beekeepers on the West Bank or somewhere. I'm not sure exactly where. And it was a beautiful agricultural scene. The father and son, hard at work harvesting honey. There's peace in a land of milk and honey. And it was a story about how they were making a go of it as honey farmers, Palestinian honey farmers. And I said, this is a metaphor. This is a metaphor here. Never mind conflict, never mind artificial divisions. Let's get down to basics. Why we're here. Peace is honey. Peace isn't the absence of war. It's sweet milk in a clean bucket. It's the bleating of goats in an honest man's yard. Peace is the honking of geese in the pond, cicadas chirping in the tall grass. Peace is olive presses, wine presses, harvesters clamoring for fruit in the foothills of the lower Galilee. More than silence of dawn with no rockets to disturb it. Peace is rooster crowing, hen clucking, plow points, shovels, and stiff rakes and hoes rattling in the back of a pickup truck. It is the buzz of harvest machines combing the harmonious land, horizon to horizon, feeding all the children, women, and men without prejudice, giving all the people in the land full employ. Peace is Palestinian boys in the apiaries of Dura, west of Hebron working their father's hives. It is a cloud of honeybees hovering over the rooftops of a kibbutz Ayelet Hashashar. Peace is not just the absence of small arms fired or treaty signing ceremonies in faraway capitals. It is more than just who gets what, who loses what, and both sides agree to accept it. Peace is more than the absence of war. Peace is wild ducks splashing in the Jordan River. Peace is the shared laughter of workers in the field. Peace is honey and milk in the land of milk and honey. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, George. Thank you.
Thank you, George.
Mute.
Thank you, George.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
I make,
Wow.
I make Kitty cry.
And that was a great poem to end on. Yes.
Yeah.
No, that was